Okay.
So, a very good evening and a good morning to all of you who are joining us today for this wonderful lecture by my dear friend and partly former student, Amr Shahat, who is a PhD candidate who's almost done with his doctorate on ethnobotany. And I just have to tell you that Amra is a very able student, very passionate about what he does and how he does it. And a little bit more about Amra, he will tell you himself. He comes from Egypt, from near Cairo, and we haven't had a chance to work together. But hopefully, next year or after he's done, he will be coming to the Himalayas, and we would look forward to more Egypt and Indian interaction in the Himalayas. For we know that Alexander the Great did come till the rivers, and we have to do a lot of archaeological work on that link as well, right, Amra?
Yes.
Yeah. So, Amra, over to you. He will be presenting how ethnobotany is a window to social history and cultural interaction. And he will be using Egypt as a case study. So, how the format of the talk works is that he will be talking for about 45 minutes to 1 hour. And then we open the platform for question and answers. And you can just raise your hands. There's a tab on the Zoom application, and I will take your questions as in the order they come in. And everyone is free to leave or join. There is no impositions as such. A lot of us linger on for 2 hours, 3 hours at times. That has also happened. And here we are opening up the platform to the wonderful Amra. So, Amra, please
Thank
take on the
you.
mic. And at this point, each one of you, I would request you to put your videos off, including me, and mute your mics.
Thank you, Sonali, for this wonderful introduction. And it's a pleasure and honor to present in the Himalayan Institute of Cultural Heritage Studies virtually. So I would like to start with defining or giving a hint of the history of Paleoethnobotany and what it is. So Paleo means ancient, ethno is like people, botany plants, and the usually people or scholars say this is the study of the relationship between humans and plants. Most people, when we just say plants, they don't visualize the importance of plants in our life. But once we say food, everyone says, oh, okay, food is important. Medicine, they say, oh, yes, that's definitely important. Clothing, yes, important. The money we carry is made like US dollars made of cotton that grows up in Texas. So plants goes in every part of our life, and it's very crucial tool to write the social history of people through close analysis of their uses of plants in food, medicine, clothing, trade, culture exchange network, food items or plant um, can be very crucial part. And also remember in the past, most medicinal recipes was basically like edible food or different kinds of herb. And India especially is very famous for that. So this branch of archaeology was born more recently um, than other parts or other branches of archaeology. And this is started with interesting discoveries of plants in Peru. Like this is example of mummy bundles in Peru and burials that includes different species of plants, and also in Egypt. This is example from the tomb of Kha and Merit from Luxor, Egypt, near the tomb of King Tut. And this is coming from the workers' settlement called Deir el Medina. We see very interesting, the plants buried with them is extension of what kind of plants that were meaningful in to their cultural identity, to their regional identity. So because some of these plants were wild and only grow in these regions, and whenever they traveled with them. So you have here examples of garlic, some dates, and another plant I'll show you soon called dome. But so these regional plants that grow only in that region can tell us part of their regional cultural identity within the broader culture in Egypt. But interestingly, people were not limited to their choice of plants in their food or medicinal recipes to only the plants grown in their environment, but they also imported other plants from different regions. So these plants from the tomb of Kha and Merit, for example, were not studied since they were discovered like 100 years ago by an Italian botanist called Matirollo. And then when I went to analyze them, they said, oh, nobody cared to analyze this since then, since 100 years. So the science of botany itself to identify the plants and give them name has changed a lot since that date. And I was very happy to actually find in the collection this huge fruits, very nice fruits of juniper berries. And that is very interesting because here, juniper does not grow in Egypt. We don't have any conifers that grow in Egypt. It's very dry region. So this gives us a window to the social history of culture interaction and important uh, different species of plants and the archaeological context is very important to understand the meaning of these plants. So where I am finding this is this juniper berry found in a house or in a tomb? The tomb of an elite or a tomb of just non-elite individual in simple pit burial. So here I see that the juniper berry comes in a huge quantity and the fruits are very selectively like very good quality fruits, not smaller ones as I see in non-elite tombs. And this makes sense because this is coming from the tomb of the head of the workers in the for the construction of the tombs of pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. And his name is Kha, means the shining one, and his wife Mirit is the beloved one. And corroborating the botanical finding with the other material cultures, like the chairs we have in the tombs, the inscriptions, is quite interesting. We'll come to this later, but I'm also elaborating a bit on the importance of plant remains to understand culture interaction. So here from the site of Berenike, but this dates later to the Greco-Roman period, like first millennia AD and few centuries BC. So there was an important discovery of black pepper in a huge pot. And this has, like, there's no way to have this grown in Egypt. It's definitely imported from India. And actually, Dr. Velika Undre shows my mentor, Sonali's mentor, and also Angela. They worked, Sonali and Angela worked a lot in Egypt, and they're familiar to this discovery. But now taking you to a different area of the importance of discovering botanical remains. So they are, for us in humanities and archaeology, they are quite important for social history, and they can provide data set and evidence that don't exist elsewhere. They can literally reshape the writing of the entire social history, because the finding of botanical remains in Chile, for example, in the site of Monteverde, has knocked all the colonial theories that the American were empty before like the Berlin string that led people come from like Russian area to the Americas. And the discovery of that settlement with botanical remains dating to 11th or 12th century, 11th to 12th millennia BC, proved that there was evidence of Native Americans living in these lands before that theory. So it makes us think the larger theory of archaeology and the colonial history of archaeology was this land empty or emptied by colonial practices? So this was the importance from the social history side. But from the science side, the discovery of botanical remains from ancient tombs or settlements contributed to huge advances in life sciences, geology, and other branches of sciences. And I'm gonna start with the key. Here is the step pyramid of Egypt, the first pyramid. We say, like, what is the relationship? What's the importance of this? Most people just think of the engineering in ancient Egypt and architecture, but actually in the subterranean galleries of that pyramid, there was a huge amount of botanical remains and food remains buried as offerings in these tombs. And actually, there were also botanical remains from earlier dates that were used from different first and second dynasty Egypt, the earliest kings of Egypt, and used as foundation deposit in this pyramid ritual. So the botanical remains that come from this context, like these grains, some of them are now housed in the Museum of Natural History in Chicago. Then Professor Willard Libby from UCLA, but in the beginning he was teaching in the University of Chicago and then UC Berkeley. He took some of these plant samples from the step pyramid of Egypt, located or in exhibit in the Natural History Museum in Chicago near the University of Chicago campus, and started to test if he can test time and go back in time and to know the exact ratios of carbon-14 in the ancient atmosphere and compare it to modern carbon 14, the radioactive carbon. And then he invented carbon dating. The importance of carbon dating, again, is not just limited to us in archaeology, but it helped go back to know things related to the origin of life. And he got Nobel Prize for that. And that is the first Nobel Prize and the only Nobel Prize that mentioned archaeology, because archaeology is not actually among the branches of science that are listed for Nobel Prize. But then I was lucky to study Archaeobotany in UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, as a visiting researcher for a year between both life science and anthropology. And then I realized that Kelvin cycle that we studied in high school, the photosynthesis, how the plant take carbon dioxide and emits oxygen for us, this actually happened after Libby discovered carbon-14 from the ancient Egyptian plants. And Kelvin was actually in UC Berkeley at that time when Libby was teaching. And he said, how about this? I take the carbon-14, I inject it in the plant to know how the carbon goes. We don't know how the plant lives. Like, we don't know the exact process of photosynthesis. Then he actually realized and gave all this famous Kelvin cycle that was studied in the biology books in high school for photosynthesis. And then he decided to make a whole institute, called it the Institute of Life. And he also got a Nobel Prize for that. So I'm just saying that the importance of archaeobotanical remains contributed to both humanities and life sciences and beyond. Now I'll go back to the archaeology side. Okay. So we think now how the archaeological, how the paleoethnobotanical remains are preserved. Okay.
Just a second. Somebody's mic is on.
Okay.
मेरी बेस्ट फ्रेंड शादी कर रही और वो भी उस बंदे से जिसे मैं प्यार करती और मैं नहीं आती.
Okay.
चल अब अपना हीरो बोल. हाँ.
Whose mic is on?
Okay. Can I go on?
Yes, you can go on.
Thank you. So how the archaeological, how botanical remains, which are organic remains, are present and they can dissolve and degrade in the soil easily. How can we work on that? How can we find them? So honestly, when I said the science started with discovery of plants in Peru and Egypt, that's because Peru and Egypt are in common in terms of the arid climate. And this helps botanical remains preserved as they are in desiccated condition, like very dry condition. But in other areas, for example, I do excavations in Spain, I only find botanical remains only if they were used or exposed to fire, if someone was cooking and dropped some food in a kitchen context. When I work in settlements, like I was digging in a Roman villa in Spain, and then you can find these plant remains in charred condition, like after they were exposed to some amount of fire while cooking or something. And this is actually most archaeological sites. We discover the botanical remains in charred conditions. In dry areas, as I said, in Egypt, or in sandy soils, not clayey soils, desiccated plant materials can be found. And we save the soil very critically. We use very small mesh, like 0.5, to find them. If you just keep sieving with the regular sieve, you may not find any botanical remains. Rarely you can find botanical remains in fossilized condition, and I only found this case in Egypt once. I mean, from archaeological record. If you go to the geological record before like 10 millennia BC, we can see some fossilized print of plants on rocks, but this is the specialization of paleontologists. So I'm giving you examples here. This is how charred barley look like after it's charred. And these are like the chaff around it here. This is a fruit called dome. It comes from a specific palm tree with two heads that grows only in the southern part in Egypt, not the northern part. And it grows also along the Nile in Sudan and Kenya and parts of Ethiopia. And this is the only case of fossilized dome fruit I found in Egypt from the burial of Deir el Ballas. So in the archaeobotanical field, when we publish and speak about the fruits, because maybe you are familiar to this fruit, but you give it a different name. So to avoid confusion, we write the names in Latin. Here, we write the name of the genus, hyphen, and the name of the exact species in Latin also, but in lowercase. Here, the beginning is in uppercase, hyphen, Thibeka. Okay, and then if you want to write the family, all families ends with ai, Aricaceae. In the beginning, it sounds complicated, and I couldn't imagine myself actually saying any word in Latin. But then I got familiar to it. This is just for the purpose of publication. Sometimes you have very rare, exceptional level of preservation to the level of the smell. Sometimes you find the plants with preserving their original smell since thousands of years. And I was lucky to find this basket of cumin that still preserves its smell after like 3,000 or 4,000 years. And this around 1500 BCE, like 1500 BCE, found in a basket. Once I removed this top of the basket, I found the cumin with the smell preserved. This again raises a lot of questions because cumin was not native to Egypt, and this must have been an import probably from India also, because cumin is very common in India, but this needs further investigation that I'm gonna tell you what I used to know where exactly the plant from. This is a different method that I use, but we stick now for the methods of finding plant remains. Okay, as I said, for the dry plant remains, we just use a sieve, but if not, I actually join the excavations, build a flotation machine. Flotation means like to float something in water. And I basically bring the soil from the ground and pour it here. And I bring water from this other bucket and I use a pump. And there is the water actually is going from this bucket to that one, and it actually flows from bottom to up. So when it flows from bottom to up, it dissolves the soil. The archaeologists said, oh, we didn't find any plant remains. But I said, if you don't look for them, you will never find them. After I built this machine and I poured one small bucket, we found like thousands of species to the extent that I had to extend my stay in Egypt. And I made a song, I said, in Arabic and in English. Flotation, my friend, the flotation, so don't lose any information. That's a song for, because I was teaching the workers about Archaeobotany, so I made a song in Arabic. And for my students, I also translated it in English. Okay, so that's again. So he pumps here the water and it flows from bottom to up. It stirs the soil. I pour very gently. Like you see, I'm throwing this bucket like this. That's the soil. It stirs it gently from the bottom up. So the soil goes down and the botanical remains, because they have lower density than water, they float here in that part, and they go in a small piece of cloth that I then dry and take the plants for identification. Okay. All right, now I'll go for the specific site in Egypt called Deir el Ballas. And this is located in so here is Egypt. This is in the Qina Bend here. And this provides the shortest access to the Red Sea. And later on was the key region for the trade with India through Indian Ocean, like whether going to Africa, southern regions of Africa, like Sudan and the lands of Punt, or to travel to India. And actually, these materials and the cemetery of this site was associated with a royal palace for a queen called Ahotep. She was a warrior queen after her, or in a position of a king. She led the war against Hyksos when her husband died. And the settlement that housed her workers or high elite later on was reused as a cemetery. Then George Reisner from Berkeley at that time, he worked for Harvard and Berkeley. He used fund from Phoebe Hearst from California, and he went to Egypt to dig these tombs, and he actually put these materials in a museum 100 years ago. And again, everyone ignored the botanical remains, and nobody studied them since then. So I was lucky to have a permission and access these materials, and with the invitation of a friend of mine, her name is Vicky Jensen, and we published this together. She published the cemetery, the material culture, and I published the food remains, and merging this together in collaboration helped us write the social history of these people buried in the cemetery. So here you have the royal palace, and the cemetery I'm talking about is here, and it is west of the Nile River. So again, this is the workers' village. And then they use mud brick walls to reuse these rooms into small burials for non-elite. So here, in this non-elite context, without wall decorations, without big coffins, we may think that, okay, we cannot write the social history of these people. We usually get attracted for people with big cemeteries, and Egyptian archaeology in general is biased towards the elite buildings, pyramids, big tombs in Luxor and Memphis or Giza region. So how about these provinces in other regions in Egypt that can give us a window for larger scale of culture interaction, especially in this kind of band that gives access to the oasis in Egypt. It gives access to southern regions of Africa. It gives access to the Red Sea, and the shortest access to the Red Sea to trade with other regions in the world. So at that time, I also got interested in the history, social history of understudied non-elite groups of non-elite groups like women and children in these burials. Also, most Egyptological writings do not address these people. And UCLA Center for the Study of Women got excited for this and funded my project. Then I said, okay, we can write the social history of these people by analyzing their bodies and the food and items they were buried with. So here you find the botanical remains found within these pots, inside them or right next. So from the style and the study of the ceramics with the botanical remains, we could write the social history of this plant. So the most common was this dome fruit. And again, this signifies interaction with other regions in Africa, like along the Nile, as it grows in Sudan and Ethiopia and southern part of Egypt. So I started to look at other plant species to find dates. This is also local, and a kind of fig called sycamore fig. And here people don't bury something randomly in their graves. It should have been something meaningful for them. And some reviewers, when I try to publish this, say, okay, the food in their daily life, we cannot take the food in their burials as representative to their daily life. But actually, one can argue that people don't put in their tombs something unless it was really meaningful for them during life. For the sycamore fig, you can just, it is not just food, but it also associated with goddess of love and motherhood and maternity in Egypt, goddess Hathor. And one more thing, this goddess was also associated with long distance trade and the patroness of trade with foreign lands. So I also went to, with my friend Vicky, for the archival notes of the actual discoveries to see what else was found. Even a small piece like a seal like that, say in Ma'at Kara, like from the reign of Hatshepsut, can give us some kind of relative dating to these tombs of the non-elite. And Interestingly, we found evidence of Cypriot pots and from Cyprus style. And this started at that time to be spread throughout Eastern Mediterranean regions. And this is another clue for interaction with other regions in the Mediterranean. Then we found two kinds of dates, Phoenix dactylifera, that's the Latin name, but also found Parthenocardic date. Parthenocardic dates is a date, you know, the palm trees has male and female, and the pollination season, like in Mesopotamia, they would show the king go up, take the pollen from the male palm and put it in the female palm. But this, if not happened, you get dates with no pit like this. And we call it parthenocardic date, like an aborted baby with no backbone, nothing. It's like just little piece of flesh of date. And here, this is something interesting. Now I got the question. This is usually, ethnographically speaking, if we use ethnography, this is thrown for animals like sheep and goats to eat. Why people put it in a dish and put it in a tomb? So it takes us to the social history of taste in the past, that something like this we may not consider edible. It might have been edible or considered as food in the past. And then more surprisingly, I said, okay, maybe this is because we are in a non-elite context, poorer context. But surprisingly, even in the tomb of Tutankhamun, there was also evidence of parthenocardic dates. Again, we found many dome fruits. And as I said, this is a tree. It is like a palm that grows with two heads like here. And in the Roman period, this was very important because the dome palm was associated with the cult of the baboon-headed god, or the baboon god, god Tot, god of wisdom and writing and medicine in ancient Egypt. And when the Romans imported this cult from Egypt, the cult of that baboon and god Tot, interestingly, they depicted and imported the dome palm in Rome and depicted it in Roman glass flask. They depicted a shrine of the baboon and a dome palm tree behind it. But here I wanted to say something else, that even the pit, like you ate the fruit, inside the fruit you have a pit that you will probably throw it away. Interestingly, we found this pit, I find it like punched and holed. And when I spoke to my father, who actually comes from this region, from the Kinabend, he said, actually, when we were kids, we did not throw this away. We made it like games, like rattles or necklaces. And then when I traveled in person again in another season, I found that both sycamore fig and indeed the pits of the dome fruit were used as a necklace and actually sold in the streets. So I bought this from a lady in Aswan in Egypt. This is sycamore fig and this is the dome pit that shows same exact like I found in the archaeological record. And this part is just darkened here from being in the soil for thousands of years. But it's quite interesting that ethnoarchaeobotany or paleoethnobotany is very enriched when integrated with local native knowledge and doing ethnographic knowledge.
Amr, do you have a
Yes.
photo of that? Because are you showing a photo? Because we couldn't see it.
This, yes, is here. You
Oh,
don't see?
because we just see tomb 89.
89.
We are just able to see the notes of tomb 89.
Okay, I'll go back.
Yeah.
Here. How about this?
No, I think your screen is frozen, so you might want to share it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. How about this? Share again.
Yeah,
right?
stop sharing and then reshare.
Okay.
No, it's stuck. I
Yes,
hope,
yes,
yeah,
I'm trying. I'm trying.
yeah. And if it can't be resolved, then maybe you can log out and log in again.
Okay. Is it this? Are you seeing this line? No, it's not visible.
I hope
How
that's the
about
case
this?
with
Is it
everyone.
visible now? Is it visible now?
It's still tomb 89. It's stuck on the tomb.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Should I
Yeah.
come back to the meeting maybe?
So yeah, so maybe do you want to log off? Now we can see you. Now try sharing again.
Okay. I'll open my presentation.
Just answering. Rajneesh, I think it's your speaker because I think we all can hear very clearly.
Okay. You can hear me?
I can
Now,
hear you. I can hear. Everyone can hear you. There was just a
is it
question.
shared?
Yeah, now it's shared, so you can just go back to that slide, and if you could just reiterate what you were talking about, when you found
Okay. Slideshow.
through the ethno-archaeological part where you found that dome thing.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So, okay, now, like in modern days, we speak about how like recycling and zero waste, but it was interesting in the past, they didn't even throw the pits inside the fruits. But when you discover this as an archaeobotanist, you ask yourself several questions. Is this biodegradation of the fruit and you ended up with the pit? So originally the ancient Egyptians buried the whole fruit, or they just buried this pit? So these are among the questions you ask. So ethnoarchaeology was also helpful because when I showed this pit to my father, I said, this is an original hole in the dome fruit pit. He said, yes, when we were children, we would make games out of this, like small toys, rattles or necklace, etc. And then I said, okay, I have to do some ethnographic research to make sure what I have here. Is this a child piece game or was used in the past as a food offering and actual fruit buried? So I found someone actually in Aswan selling these necklaces for children, and she had sycamore figs and colored, and she had this doom fruit pit from inside, like that we throw away. And it was actually whole the same way as the archaeological one I found. And the white part here it just darkened in the archaeological one because it was buried for thousands of years. Um, so I actually talked to my colleague Vicky Jensen, who is publishing the material culture here, and I said, "Was this tomb 105 a tomb of a child? Can we dig into the archival notes again?" And then she said, actually, the excavator Reisner 100 years ago left a note that uh, he found coffins of a child, very small coffin that was like eaten or worn out by termites. So it was very interesting that the fruit here is used as a material culture, and the analysis of the material culture with archival notes, the context, and ethnography all together give us to access to see children buried with adults in same cemetery and having their own like a grave here, grave 105. Because this is among the very understudied groups in Egyptian archaeology. Then another tomb was quite interesting, where I found large diversity of plants that are not native to Egypt. Some are imported. And then I had to look with my friend into the material culture again, in case we find any note of identifiable ceramic with a specific date, or find any seals or ring or anything with inscription. Again, we are dealing with non-elite who have very, very few material culture in their grave. The grave is very small. So we found that this seal have the coronation name of Jehuti Mes. It has, the birth name of King Tutmosis. And then when I did carbon date, I realized that this is Tutmosis III, but at the time from Tutmosis, we don't know which King Tutmos. And King Tutmosis III was known for expansion and campaigns out of Egypt. And we know he made like a depiction of botanical garden inside Karnak temple, that he brought new species of birds and plants into Egypt, including pomegranate. So what happened here, found grapes, and that's fine. The wild fruits that are native to Luxor, Egypt, the very original identity to the part. So probably we have Theban people from Luxor living in that area of Kunabend. And I actually found the earliest evidence of pomegranate in Egypt. And these are the rinds of pomegranate. This was sparkling under the microscope with the red fruit color of the pomegranate. It was very interesting to look at under the microscope. I really loved them. And so the pomegranate is not native to Egypt either at that time. We're speaking about 1500 BCE. And it is native to and grows wild in the region of Iran, parts of the Levant, North Levant, like Lebanon. And it could have been an import from some of these regions. And we also discovered juniper berries. And juniper berries grows also the very north part of Southwest Asia, like Lebanon. It's called actually Juniperus phoenicia in Latin, like Phoenicia from Lebanon. And even in the archaeology of Palestine/Israel, they discovered when they found juniper there, they actually considered it import from the north. But one more region not really considered. There are forests in southern Arabia, like Saudi Arabia, that have juniper grows naturally. And to know where exactly these grow before it came to Egypt, I do some other kind of analysis called stable isotope. Because plants drink water like us humans, and the oxygen that makes up the body of the fruit is like the oxygen from the water making body parts for you, like your teeth, your hair, and fingernails. So to know where you come from, I can look at the oxygen isotope from your teeth or hair. Teeth, it tells me the history of your place growing up, like your birth certificate. And the oxygen from your hair is like your passport. It gives me your current history of travel or where you are located based on the water source you drink. The plants are the same thing, but it's quite more complicated because it doesn't only record the water source, but also record the whole climate condition. It was there aridity, was there good humid water conditions. So here is what I found when I did this. The local plants had no ecological problem, no ecological stress, growing perfectly, drinking from Nile water, no problem. But when I analyzed this, the juniper berry, it showed me actually huge water stress, that this plant grow up in arid condition different than the Nile region. So this is another additional evidence that this is an important fruit. But again, archaeobotany didn't just tell me culturally what is imported here and what is the cultural significance of having this in Egyptian burial. Probably this person was a better off or was in a higher status than the rest of the people in the cemetery. That's the social meaning. But even the ecological history, the history of climate change, it gives us the history of the food ecology in the past. So this tells me this is imported and imported from a place that suffered from arid climate. And at that time, when I carbon dated it to know what is exactly the date, it actually matched the 4.2K aridity event in the ancient Near East. So there was some waves of hyper aridity conditions in the Levant, like Southwest Asia. And because they are dependent on rain-fed agriculture in some areas like Syria. And when there is an aridity, they start to migrate out and to go to other regions, like in New Kingdom, Egypt, we got people also migrating. But archaeologists usually had a lot of debate accepting the ecological theory behind social change, but we have actually clear evidence of climate change by using the archaeobotanical materials. Again, to serve life scientists, I made another experiment and I said, okay, I want to actually know the soil fertility level in the past versus now in Egypt. And then when I tested the nitrogen here, which tells me the nutrition condition in the plant, I measured the nitrogen isotope. And it showed that in the past, there was high soil fertility and higher humidity condition, like more water availability than today. And maybe the construction of dams along the rivers have decreased the soil fertility in Egypt and in other regions. Another interesting discovery, so we said the pomegranate evidence and the juniper berry gives us a window for culture interaction and imports from the Levant and even the climate in that region. Another finding was very interesting. These are seeds of watermelon. And here, these are not just random or the sour wild melon that we find in Egypt called Citrullus colocynth, since pre-dynastic. No, this is actually Citrullus lanatus, the domesticated sweet watermelon that we enjoy eating in the summer. And again, this was not native to Egypt. It's originally, and this is actually where it is origin or native to is a hot debate in archaeobotany. Some say in tropical Africa and some say West Africa. But regardless, it's actually the first evidence of finding, or the earliest evidence of finding watermelon in Egypt. And there was later on comparable finding of domesticated watermelon in the settlement of Amarna. So this gives us also a window to cultural interaction with other regions in Africa. So before I go and start to wrap up the conclusions, the ceramic evidence, which I did not elaborate much here, can actually consolidate the theory of cultural interaction here, because we found also Cypriot pots. And in my very recent field work, when I did this flotation machine and continued excavation, we found Nubian pots in the settlement. And so we have African community and probably people from the ancient Near East, from Southwest Asia, also living in Egypt at that time, and part of the interaction and dynamics in the region of Deir el Ballas. So this topic of cultural interaction is discussed using other regions like Giza, Memphis, Luxor. But when it comes to provinces and other provinces in Egypt, this is very understudied. So here we see that people use complex use of plant sources around them. Like these are some quick conclusions I'm trying to wrap here. Even after domestication of wheat and barley, and this is a bias in archaeobotany, people focus on domesticated plants that makes larger economic profit, but actually wild fruits like the nabak, we call it Christ thorn, the dates, other kinds of nuts like persea nuts, all of this actually continued to be important to the food system, to the medicinal recipes, and also to the food, to the culture of food offering in the afterlife. So we found also, and also people are not limited to choices of plants depending on the ecological and regional availability, what is available in the region, but they did take the difficult choice of bringing in and importing their fruits. Wild fruits continued to be important after domestication. Mash from a jar, and I actually found I could identify that this is barley, different region. Again, of taste is quite different, but archaeobotany can contribute to that. What people value is not. There are like kinds of salted
Amr, we kind of lost you in between your audio. So can you just repeat a little bit of what you said? Yeah, I just want to ensure, is everybody else having an audio problem? Amr,
yes.
you're muted.
Okay, now do you hear me?
Yeah. So if you could just repeat the last 2 minutes, because I think the audio went blank. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So did you see like the watermelon? Did you hear that one?
Yes, we heard the watermelon, but if you could kind of talk after what happened.
You saw it? Okay. Okay, so to conclude, I put like the different species we found here. So food shapes people's body and shapes their cultural identity. And this is through complex use of plants, like not just what is available to them. They actually made harder choices of importing fruits from other regions. And one of the famous, either for food or medicinal recipes, we know of the famous imported frankincense, which get imported from the lands of Punt. But also, after they domesticated wheat and barley, the local fruits and wild plants shape the regional identity within the culture. If you go to the north in other regions, you don't find this combination of plants. And interestingly, the dome fruit that I showed you, when I went with Angela to King Tut exhibit in Los Angeles, I found that the curators, after I went home one time to visit him, has actually packed dome fruit from Egypt. And this is wild fruits. Who in the world would carry dome fruit in Los Angeles and bring it here, and have this trouble going through the customs in America. They actually check for plants if we don't have permission to bring them in. But he brought them like for their cultural identity. This is important. So, and actually, by comparing this to other sites, like in different ports along the Red Sea, I could see that these people are like from the region of Thebes or ancient Luxor or the Canaan, because they bring with them to the Red Sea or to the port some of their wild fruits that grows in the region. Also, wild fruits are important. In the recipe of doing beer, I made a non-destructive analysis of a beer mash. I developed this method, and I found that it was okay made of barley, but it was very interesting that this beer sample was sweetened by also one of the wild fruit species in the region. So this is like an Upper Egyptian beer. Interestingly, the pot that included this beer mash was not Egyptian. It was actually Palestinian style pot. And that is an interesting thing because it revives an old theory in Egyptology of the reuse of imported pots in Egyptian context. So again, the conclusion, I'm wrapping some important points. The conclusion from this point that the bias in archaeobotany towards economic plants and domesticated wheat and barley and domesticated species should not exclude our attention to what other wild or different plant species important to this culture and form this the regional identity in that place. Also, the finding of plants can give us a window to the archaeology of taste, what people valued and considered edible or not. There are things that people like people in France make frog soup and consider it delicacy. In other regions, like in Egypt, we have frogs everywhere across the canal, would never even think of eating them. So here, these Parthenocardic dates that are not edible, and usually in modern day, we throw them for animals, they were put in pots and buried as food offerings in the past. So one other things we do in terms of methodology in ancient, for archaeobotany, we make like a bar chart to say what exactly what I found, and I publish the plant names in here, the quantities, and when I publish, I add the quantity of them and the tomb context. And this is important for us because all what I explained is coming from non-elite context. And here in non-elite context, the quantity matters because even in the formula in hieroglyphs, they say, oh, a prayer to God Osiris or offerings coming to you, thousands of breads, thousands of beer, thousands of owls, etc. And also what differs from the burials of elite, in the non-elite context, I didn't find any food remains of animals like ducks or fowls that we found mummified and buried as food offerings in the elite burials. They also don't have this large quantity and quality of the elite context, like the tomb of Ka. I found also larger quantities of imported plants like this almond, sometimes preserved inside special box. And here it says, NKN for the soul of, Imi Kau, the overseer of workers in Deir Medina. Kha means the shining one. This is in hieratic. And this is again the sample of almond, still perfectly preserved after thousands of years. and these are located today in the in the Museo in Italy. While the fruits continue to be important, and this is a tuber. Tuber is like potato, grows under the ground, and Cyperus esculentus, and this grows only in the delta. So it shows you that he is from Upper Egypt, from the Luxor. This is from a different burial. And the wood itself is actually made of softwood here, this part. This is also not native to Egypt. So the box itself is imported. And the almond is imported probably from Eastern Mediterranean region. But this is from the delta, this tuber. So as an elite, you get access to more imported plant species, either from other regions in Egypt or from out of Egypt. Again, in this basket, found large quantity of juniper berry that I said comes from North Levant, like Lebanon. And these are some just hint about what is the importance of archaeobotany to the writing of social history, and also as important in contribution to life science in terms of dating, saying history of plants, genetics. Some species went extinct, don't exist anymore. And it tells us the history of the ecology, the conditions under which these plants grow. Was it aridity condition, or high soil fertility condition, or poor condition due to the use of fossil fuel-based fertilizers today, which damage the soil and decrease the nutrition inside our food. So thank you all, and I'm ready for any questions. And thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Amr. This was so, just a minute. This was so enlightening. Even though it's such a technically driven thing, scientifically driven, with the sciences, yet, you have so many insights that you gain. And it's so important for others to know what happens behind the scenes. So if you could stop sharing your screen so we can have a full view of you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So everybody comes to know that science helps you so much in ascertaining. And while you were giving your talk, I made so many notes. And here you talked about the non-elite. So the voice of the disenfranchised becomes so important. Where written history talks about the elite, about things that they did, and all this exaggerated versions at times which the elite wanted to portray, about their identity, about who they were. But the non-elite kind of huddle in that corner where their voices are not heard because they cannot read or write. But things like that, things like ethnobotany can actually open up their whole life, and you can understand them from a very different point of view. And it brought to mind, how the Romans, they loved pigs. And even at our site in Karanis, in certain areas we found pig bones, while in other areas we did not. So that kind of also shows the social structure of a place, that what is valued and what is value. What may be valued in a particular region may not be valued in another region. So how do you qualify value also becomes very important. So this has been really, really informative, and sheds light on so many things that otherwise we would not be aware of. And when you were talking about, and I'll start taking the questions right after that, you were talking about the ethnographic, ethnoarchaeological part, when you talk to the local people, like when you saw that string with fruit, dried fruit, and you had seen it. And then you asked your friend, Vicky, that was this a child's tomb? And that was indeed correct.
Yeah.
And similarly, even in India, in the Himalayas, in a region called Kinnaur, they have strings that not only children, everybody wears, and they put some dry fruits in that, and they use it in marriages, and the kids play and they kind of put it on and they kind of eat while they're talking. Even in Ladakh, they do that. So it's really interesting to see, whether this kind of practice, how far it goes, and whether there's a core area from where it started. We all are wired similarly, so maybe we all think about garlands with eating. It's so relaxing and all of that. And on one of my walks in a village, I came across the stinging nettles, right? So the locals that I walk with, and my friend who I walked with,
Yes.
he told me, stinging nettles were like, oh, this is, it is useful for nothing. But then I realized the locals use it to make a sauce, which is very good for the blood. And it is also used for disciplining kids, because when they don't behave, you show them the stinging nettle and suddenly they'll start doing
Yeah.
their homework. And I tried it on my son, and he's so scared of it. He says, Mama, I'll do it. I know it's really bad, to do that, but I just show him the magic wand, in my case, the stinging nettles. And I made a video on this as well. So without taking much time, I open the thing for others, and I'll bring in my thoughts as we progress. So we have the first question, Dr. Parth Chauhan. He is a prehistoric archaeologist, and he's a co-director in a lot of our projects with the Himalayan Institute. He's a professor. So Parth, over to you. Can you please ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Sonali. Thank you, Amar. That was a very nice presentation. Very insightful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm not a expert on this subject. I'm more into stone tools. So please excuse my basic questions. I was just curious. I have a few questions actually. One thing about the context. I was just curious about you said that, like, for example, some of the material shows interaction with other regions. So how do you know that there's interaction with that specific region, like the source region, and not an intermediate region instead? Like
this is an interesting question. Yeah, this is an interesting question because both are possibilities, and to narrow down this, I look into texts. Like when I found the seal saying this is Tutmosis III, I look at other sections from other texts dating to that time period. So we know that Tutmosis III has military campaigns in these regions, and there were Egyptian fortresses actually in the Levant. So, and there were findings, as we see foreign plants in Egypt, like pomegranate. Some Egyptian plants, like Egyptian wheat and dome fruits, were actually found in the Levant in these fortresses, like Jaffa in modern day Israel, the fortress of Jaffa. It dates to Tutmosis III. And in the textual context, it says he lists the places he visited in military campaign. But actually, to go in a military campaign alone would not make you value the food of the people of other culture without actually having some kind of cultural interaction with them. Another important text, and we found the tomb, but I didn't show it in detail here, from the time of Queen Hatshepsut. And at the time of Hatshepsut, we know that there was interaction with tropical Africa, or the lands of Punt, like modern day Ethiopia, Eritrea. And she was depicted in her wall, a scene of going to this land, Punt, through the Red Sea. Even the water depiction in the temple showed the Red Sea lobsters. So it represents the Egyptian soldiers or meeting the elite of that region. And the text emphasized the importance of food sharing. They were eating together while making the trade deal and the exchange of products. They get Egyptian products Egyptians got the frankincense trees from them, put them in the Egyptian ships and brought back. So in Egypt, we're quite lucky that we get depictions and texts and more lines of evidence that I can integrate into the botanical record interpretation. But interpretation is sometimes arguable, is not full certainty. Sometimes I use life science method, and as I said, I measure the oxygen isotope inside the plant to know which water source it grew up taking. If it is coming from the Nile River, it has particular signal of the Nile River. If it's coming from like lakes or other regions, it will have the signature of that region. Like you, if Sonali, for example, grew up in India, her teeth has the oxygen of the water she grew up drinking in India. But she's now in Los Angeles drinking from the water of the Colorado River. Her hair has the oxygen isotope of Colorado River. So your teeth is like birth certificate, your hair is like a passport, and the same goes for plants with more measures and complications, but it's the same method I use to know where things are from.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, have you found material that you were not able to identify ever?
Yeah,
is there a lot of?
I have two plant species. I think they're coming from India, one of them at least, but I'm still working on it.
And I've seen one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, Sonali was
nice.
helping. Yeah, and interestingly, sometimes like the beer sample, this preservation is very actually is a fifth kind of preservation. This is preserved by fermentation. So when it was fermented to make beer, it distorted the shape of the plant, and that is the problem. Like even if botanists come trained only in botany, sometimes cannot identify the ancient plant remains because they are not familiar on how the plants look like after being buried for thousands of years and reshaped or decomposed partially and fragmented by the archaeological burial context. So sometimes the context and the soil degrade conditions affects my ability to identify the plant. And then genetic now is the best method, genetics, to submit it for genetic analysis, DNA analysis.
Okay, and my final question, could there be preservation bias? Like, for example, you were saying that the elite tombs have more material preserved, the quantity, but is it possible because they're more secure and better preserved tombs? That's why there's more preservation, or no?
Yeah, that's a great question. But here it takes us to other line of evidence that we have to integrate, which is the architecture. The non-elite burial is already like 2 meter by 2 meter. Like, so the quantity is even limited by that space. But when you go to the elite tomb, you have huge rooms just for storing offerings beside the burial chamber. Like in early Egypt, you would have subterranean gallery and you have upper rooms. The upper rooms was mainly for sometimes for offerings. They depict them on the walls and they store them. But preservation bias is also important. That's one of the things we consider. Some plant species, especially tubers like potato, but of course we did not have potato in Egypt. The Cypriot species, this dissolve and get lost in the soil very easily. So this is some kind of the preservation bias we get, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Parth. And I have a question.
Yes.
And after that, I'll take Arun Shankar's question. what was the use of juniper berries, and do you find them, the leaves of the juniper, also? What do you think it was used for?
This
And
is one of the.
it's interesting because just 3 days ago, Angela and I were talking about juniper. So I'll tell you why I asked this question.
There is a modern use of it. They make it for gin, like alcoholic liquor
Okay.
drink, gin. That's modern. No, in the past, it actually smells great. So probably it was also used for oil, perfumery, or medicinal recipes. But here I didn't find the leaves, which can be used as teas, like in Eastern Europe. Some regions of Europe, like Croatia, they have juniper forest. They use it for multiple purposes, including tea, medicinal recipes like drinks. But actually, in Egypt, I only found the fruit part. I never discovered the leaves.
Okay, that's interesting because here in the Himalayas, we use juniper for fragrance. And I know that the ancient Egyptians were very, very this thing
Oh,
about collecting.
that is true.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
insight. Yeah. That's
that
what these
is.
platforms help in gaining insight,
Mm.
right?
So one of the great things too, uh, I use Juniper berries when I make chutney.
You do?
No, not me. I'm reading Valerie's comments.
Oh, yeah, she wrote that in Turin. She used to use it as a spice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So juniper, so you
the
don't find the
oil.
leaves, the oil.
Yeah, perfumery, yes, and oils. And we know that for mummification, to make the body smells good, they use different oils and resins to seal the body and also make it smells good.
Right, right. Okay. So the next question is from Arun Shankar.
Yes.
If you could take on the mic, Arun.
Yeah, hello.
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 Yeah, we can
Hello,
hear you.
hello.
Hello,
I
Amr.
do. I hear
Yeah,
you.
okay, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, hello, sir. So I have a question that in ethnobotany, to the contemporary part, we always come across like human giving a particular feed for the animal that having a composed of the vegetation. So are there any kind of studies that are cited in the ancient period to find that particular domesticated food for the domesticated animals?
Ah, yes, yes. We have scenes in ancient Egyptian tombs showing that they would feed grain like wheat and barley to domesticated animals like cattle and sheep and goats. And at the same time, they use the waste, like the feces remains, the excrement, as a dung, as a fertilizer to the soil. And I discovered both. And one way to know what the cattle or the animal were eating is I actually take the feces remain from, or the dung from the cow, which I discover in settlement from cows or from, and actually one time I discovered the dung put inside a pot and buried as offering inside the tomb. I don't know the connotation, probably as a fuel for the oven. So they are providing food and fuel for afterlife to sustain the deceased.
Or was it for
But
Hathor? Could be, Hathor.
I know that Khepir, like the rising sun god, the Khepir, like the beetle, they eat cattle dung. But for sheep, yeah, that's it. But sheep and goat also, I found it in some burials. And I still don't know the interpretation. But to go back to your question, to understand what they were eating, I could take the dung and take the chaff from the dung and run it for carbon isotope analysis. And it tells you the kind range of plants they were eating. So when I did this once, it showed that they were eating C3 plants, which is like wheat and barley and this kind of plants. Plus, I discover a lot of wheat and especially barley more than wheat in barn context where animals are raised. And sometimes I discover safflower as fodder for animals. Safflower and barley so often. Yeah. And Egyptian tombs also show someone going to feed the cattle and pour a basket of grain to feed them. Yes.
Great. Yeah.
I had a quick question. I didn't, sorry, it's Angela.
Angela.
Hi, Amr.
Oh, hi,
Good to
Angela.
see you. So earlier I had shown my video so you could see that I'm in a juniper forest right now in Oregon.
Oh, really?
So this is the juniper forest.
I love it.
Yeah, but in any case, I'll turn the video back off. But my question to you was, I didn't catch which site at which you were working, where you
Deir el
found
Ballas.
What was it?
Deir el Ballas, it's in Qina.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
Deir el Ballas.
Angela, it's the same
Peter
site.
Lacovara is working there.
Yeah. And it's the same site, Angela, where I did that pottery production thing when I went to Kenya.
Okay. And were those recently excavated materials you were analyzing, or were those done in the past?
That's a great question. The larger material was discovered by Reisner 100 years ago. But this actually brings the question of the preservation bias, because using older archaeological techniques 100 years ago would not even retrieve all the botanical remains from the site. So that was a great question before. And then I actually had to go in recent excavation last December and worked and made this flotation machine that I showed in the beginning of presentation. And then I started to find more species of plants. I found also pomegranate again, juniper again. I also found different herbs like coriander, you know. So yeah, so I made more recent excavations, and I still have to analyze more next December, next season, if Corona doesn't prevent us from traveling.
Oh, right. Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful, because as you mentioned, I think already that the techniques that are used now for paleobotany are so much different than 100 years ago, that you're able to glean a lot more information, as well as find those smaller remains that were overlooked or just not seen.
Yes.
Thank you. That was a wonderful lecture.
Thank you, Angela. Happy to see you here.
And you know, earlier we were talking about the fertilizer, and I do want to tell the audience that fertilizer was the bane for archaeologists, because a lot of sites were destroyed for want of fertilizer for agriculture in, you know, between the 1900s and the 1940s. So even the site that we all worked in Karanis in Egypt, most of the site was kind of pillaged because of fertilizer. So though, and I'm so happy that Amr uses fertilizer for the ethnobotanical side of things, but a lot of that information has gone in the agricultural field to grow these beautiful plants that will be studied by future archaeologists. And that brings me to documentation, you know, the notes that you showed. So even now, you know, documentation and context is so important that even though we do not study all aspects related to our research, it is so important to document it, so that, you know, like today, 100 years later, you're able to, you know, reflect on what the earlier archaeologists were thinking.
Yeah, these were Reisner notes.
Yeah.
100 years ago, and I couldn't read that English.
Yeah.
So I worked with a co-author, my friend Vicky Jensen from UC Berkeley, and
Yeah.
she could figure out that.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I'll do the botany, you do the archive, and we'll try to integrate the interpretation together.
Yeah, and
But
that's
if
why writing and digitizing both are important.
digitizing, yeah.
Yeah, both are
These are
important because
digitized
Mhm.
in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, like with Harvard,
Mhm.
with collaboration with Harvard.
Mhm.
So they digitized Reisner notes, and these are the copy.
Yeah,
issue.
and also like because writing is also important, because who knows what will happen to the digital archive that we have today. We are so confident about it, but we never know, you know, what
Yeah.
could happen. So we should have things that we can totally rely on and make as much of that as possible. And I really have a lot of faith in the hand rather than on the technical glitches that we face and, you know, digital things. But both are important. And
Yes.
I do want to introduce you, Amr, to Dr. Manan Desai. He's a PhD in biochemistry and teaches evolutionary biology and molecular biology.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
yeah, and in the coming weeks, he will be talking about ethnobotany as well. And I do want you to attend that lecture as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Pleasure
yeah.
to meet you.
Yeah, Manan, are you around? If you are, please drop in and we would love to hear from you.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Sonali, for this introduction. And Amra, I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yes, yes, Dr. Manan.
It was a very interesting talk and quite fascinating. The kind of work you've done. Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I hope to interact with you when I deliver my talk.
Yes, yes, was full pleasure.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take the next question from Jenny, who's at Princeton, and then we'll take Dr. Vibha Joshi's question, who is in Oxford. Okay.
Hi, thank you very much for this very informative talk.
Yeah,
I have
thank
a
you.
question. It's really very informative.
Yes, please.
Can you are you involved in any lab studies of bringing ancient seeds back to life, such as the emmer wheat, and what are the possibilities of that, given that wheat cultivation now has become so corrupt and so on?
This is a great question, and this is the most common question the people in the field, the workers and the visitors to the site ask me. First, when I say I'm looking for plants and they just see dirt and soil, they don't even imagine that I'll get plants out of this soil. And after I sieve and make the flotation and I get the seeds out, they get so surprised of the quality of the ancient seeds, like bigger, nice nutrition, grown in very nice soil conditions. And then they ask the same, can this grow again? There were two experiments and different experiments that succeeded, including a friend of mine in the Agricultural Research Institute in Cairo, and he successfully actually grew Egyptian wheat again. Yeah. Some people, I heard of other people, like there's a famous bread experiment where they extracted the starch from ancient bread. But this one was to imitate the ancient Egyptian recipe of making bread. But trying to recultivate ancient grain did succeed in in certain conditions. If they were discovered desiccated, not charred, not burned. and they were really dry, like they did not lose the embryo or be partially damaged, like if you have the whole grains. And this is good in Egypt because sometimes they bury this inside a wooden box or inside a sealed jar, and you really find it in perfect condition. Yes.
And I have another question.
Yes, please.
As you move away from the Nile Delta, what types of plants did you find?
That's a great question. Because I did not do excavations in the oasis, for example, but what happens is that some imported plants from the Nile Valley are found there, and then it gets mixed with the local wild fruits that grow in that region. So again, when you study the integration of domesticated plants and the wild plants that people use, you can get into the identity of that region. So you know you are in the oasis or you are in the Nile Valley, etc. And most of the settlements in the desert, as one of my colleagues published, she found that they imported their food from the Nile Valley, and they used local trees for fuel, and they fished, like from the Red Sea, for example, for some protein.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you,
good
thank you,
answers.
appreciate
Very
it.
pleased to see you here.
Thank you, it's an honor for me.
Okay, so the next question is from Dr. Vibha Joshi.
Hello, Amr. That was a fascinating talk.
Hello.
It was
Thank
really
you.
very, very interesting. And having been to Egypt and seen the step pyramid, was that Saqqara?
Oh, yes.
Yes, yes. And you know, it had probably just opened to outsiders when I saw it. It was, I think, in 96 or something, 96 or 97.
Right.
So I remember sort of, you know, it was quite good. Yeah, but I wish. And also, you know, the amount of food offerings that came out from Tutankhamun's tomb,
Yeah.
which were there in the Cairo Museum. I was thinking,
Yeah.
my goodness, they look as if they've been dried just yesterday. I mean, they were
Yeah,
so well
hundreds of
preserved.
pots and
What I wanted to, oh my goodness, it was just like mind blowing actually. That
yes.
whole long room full of offerings. I wanted to ask you, you know, since you were showing these different different seeds and plants, the
Yes.
fruits and grains, do you see a difference between the tombs as to what is in among the commoners, and whether it could also reflect, whether you could also conjecture as to what could be the profession of the person who was buried because of the kind of seeds you find in the burial? Or because I know you're not just looking at burials, but you're looking at kind of general sediments also to see what all is there. But I was just kind of wondering whether you say the juniper berry, this, that, were they with everyone, or
Yeah.
could the person be a physician at that particular point,
Yeah.
or a
This
baker,
great.
or a herder? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your interesting question. And actually, in the settlement, in these graves, uh, that particular one that showed imported species is also had better off. He was like, he seemed to be to have been in higher status than the rest of the people in the cemetery, because the diversity of plant remains and the imported food species goes hand in hand with actually the quality of the material culture, including the finding of a seal that mentioned the name of the king. In one burial, I had King Tutmosis III, and in another burial, it has Queen Hatshepsut. So it seems to be that this was probably in a higher status than the rest of the people, even though they are commoners, but there was some kind of status variation, and who has access to imported food versus not, who had access to imported jars or not, and who had access to a very exclusive seal that has the name of the king. The rest, they didn't. Yeah. But sometimes we get the job, like in Kha and Merit, when it is written. So I could know that, okay, he had this high quality fruits, a lot of imported species, but I could also see from the text inscribed on the box that included the fruit what was exactly his job. So it says, for the soul of the chief of the workers in the Valley of the Kings, in Deir el Medina, or Valley of the Kings, Kha, and then it says his name. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember that. But I was just kind of wondering whether if you didn't find all the seals at the box, then is there a variation, and where you could think that, okay, this person.
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you.
Probably providing the meat or providing other things. Yeah. Great.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Amr, you mentioned about the pots, and of course, I love pots, you know that. And
they love you too.
So, for example, you showed one photograph where in Berenike, they found pepper, and the pot was actually from India, and it had the Brahmi script. So that's so fascinating. Yeah.
It has a Brahmi script?
Yes. It has the Brahmi script. And when I was there, I also found some sherds with the script as well. So, and those of you, I have these fun videos from my time in Berenike during the Arab Spring, which I have been circulating over the net. I found all this footage. And those of you who are interested in an archaeologist's life, because we tend to do funny things to break the monotony, because it's a lot of hard work being in the field. It's a lot of hard work, but we love what we do. So we document our lives as well. And that's also a kind of documentation, isn't it? You get to know how Victorian archaeologists were and how archaeologists today are. And coming to, there's a site in, of course, you know it, in Fayoum, in Tep, Tunis. And there we found a whole layer of graves of kids who had died of some plague. And a very interesting phenomenon there was that, and it was a very specific for Tep, Tunis, where the pots, used cooking pots, were inverted on the grave of the child and kept with the chaff of grass, which was very interesting. That why would they do something like that? So also, when you talk about context, and for the audience, it becomes very important that functionality of certain things can also change. All ethnobotanical material that is found was not necessarily used for being consumed, but as offerings, or maybe as a fragrant thing or something like that. Like, with this example of a pot that is not used as a cooking pot anymore, but there is some ritualistic effect where a dead child is given a cooking pot inverted over with the chaff of grass. Very peculiar, but very specific to this area. So I wanted to share that. And I do want to ask you, before I take the next question, Shamsher Thakur has the next question, and then we will take Jenny's question again. I want you to comment on the cocaine mummies. And for those of you who do not, do you know about the cocaine mummies? I'm sure you do. So the cocaine mummies are a very intriguing part of Egyptian, things Egyptian. So on the mummies, they found this evidence of tobacco. So a lot of tests went on, and the person who found it, they said, oh, how can tobacco come? It was found in the New World. How can it come to the Old World? And at that time, so when they said it's a case of contamination, but when they looked at Ramesses, the insides of Ramesses on the intestine and all, they found not only tobacco, but also cannabis and cocaine. So a kind of cannabis and evidence of tobacco. So they're called the cocaine mummies. What do you know of them, and whether that thing has been resolved? Cold case.
Honestly, I don't know much about the cocaine mummies. I hear about the contamination things and also the methods, and there are things that are just publicly like famous, but but I don't know how much rigorous scientific analysis was done for the identification. So we don't know the archaeological method of discovering it. Because I'll tell you an example. I discovered a coffin inside a tomb in Luxor, and I found maize. How does this come? Maize is American plant. And then and where this finding carbon dated, we are dealing with organic material. Why they didn't carbon date this cocaine to see its contamination or original context? So when I carbon dated, they were modern. And I also found one time coconut shell in a pre-dynastic Egyptian tomb. I said, great, I have clear evidence of interaction with India in pre-dynastic probably, or somewhere in East Asia, because coconut never grows in Egypt. It continues to be an import. So I carbon dated it. It was just 500 years ago. It was 500-year old.
Contamination, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
even in a pre-dynastic context, like 5,000-year-old context.
Yeah.
And the rest of the botanical remains were ancient. They were found. But what happens, again, the question of bias of preservation is very important, because soil also can be disturbed, not just by looters coming to dig, but even ants and small worms and biological organisms. They can move through the soil and move botanical remains from the top to bottom.
Yeah, and that brings me to I think in the context that we were working on, I had these Invisalign braces, and they fell.
Yeah.
And 4 years later, my assistant Mohammed, he said, "Look what I found," and there were these my Invisalign braces from a Greco-Roman context. So
Yeah.
contamination by
Yeah.
yeah.
So if I may show, I share the screen very quick. This is what I do. Like I didn't show this, but actually my analysis is more complicated than what I simplify in the lecture. But for every sample, I do carbon dates to actually make sure it is ancient, the probability and the level of certainty that it is ancient, like this is 95%, and the carbon date is like 1300 BC. And I also measure the carbon isotope to know the ecological condition, like carbon 13. So I measure carbon 14 to know the date, carbon 13 to know the ecology. Did it grow in good condition, good humidity along the Nile, or did it grow in aridity condition? There was drought episode in that time or not? So for every piece I do this. For pomegranate, because this is the earliest finding, I didn't see evidence of finding it before this, I had to carbon date the sample. So, and the fruits narrows down the carbon date to, because the fruit is just one season, it's one particular year. But if you have a wood sample, maybe the wood was so old, like a tree that is 500 years, or if you are in North California, redwood can live for 1,200 years. So if I carbon date this charcoal, does not give me close date as I do of a fruit part. So if they want to give conclusive events, they go to this ancient cocaine sample and carbon date it to know it is contamination or not. That's my opinion about it.
Okay, thanks. And I know you need to leave early, so we'll take a last quick question from Shamsher Thakur.
Right.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. It
Yeah,
was
pleasure to
really
meet
very
you.
interesting. I meet you too. Only have a question.
Your
Just
voice
to
is very
know.
distorted. Your voice is coming distorted. Yeah.
Hello. You can hear
Yes.
now.
Yes, now I can hear.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear now.
Yeah. So it's only a curious question. Wanted to know after carbon dating and plant materials, has a particular date been assigned or determined when it started? I mean, as to when a particular fruit or byproducts were imported or came from overseas.
Yes.
Is there a particular period?
Yeah, these ones I have, they were around 1500 BCE, like 1500, 100 more or less, in that range.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all I want.
Yeah, but the mummies are actually a host of a lot of like myths, and people make up stories. One time I heard of the cocaine, the thing, but I also found maize in an ancient coffin, but it was intrusion. I carbon date my materials, but a lot of people avoid this because carbon dating ancient botanical remains is costly, and it needs like even the process itself, you need advanced lab that can work on very small sample size, like University of California Irvine lab, and this is where I run my samples. But other labs cannot run with this small amount. I run 5 milligrams, not 5 grams. But other labs need, like in IFAO in Egypt, they need like a whole big piece, like the size of your finger. How can you do that? You would destroy all your botanical finding to carbon date it. So this is impossible. So with more advanced in size, we can carbon date very small amount to know for sure this is ancient or intrusion. There was one of your friends, Sonali, that sent me a text of finding black pepper in the nostrils, not cocaine, in Ramses II mummy. And actually, this was scientifically published. Unfortunately, we don't have the samples in Egypt. They probably were taken in France when they took the mummy, but I don't know. I don't know where these samples are. When they went for an X-ray analysis in France, Ramses II, so we didn't get this. I don't think we got this back in Egypt.
So were they deliberately placed there when he died on the mummy, or was it like a residue?
No, I found it in a publication that they found the black pepper. And of course, we know it's coming from India.
From India, yeah. So if lapis is coming from Afghanistan, I wouldn't be surprised if pepper is coming, from a route. But thanks so much, Amra. I know you're sleepy.
I have to work. Yeah, I have to work. Yes.
Okay, you have to work. But thanks so much. I just have to make two announcements before I let you go. So next week, we are having a talk by Dr. Prabhakar Nandgopal, who was the Director of Exploration and Excavations in the Archaeological Survey of India. And he will be talking about the role of the Bronze Age site, the Harappan site. And this will be very interesting for you, Amr, if you can join, talking about cultural interaction. So he will be talking about the site of Dholavira in Gujarat and Western India. And again, this month is about material culture. So we are still in the Himalayas, but we are talking about material culture and what insights it can give us. So he'll be talking about interregional and intercultural trade and focusing on materials like stone, copper, steatite, ceramics in trade. And this month, I'll also be talking about pottery. And I hope Angela can come in as well and talk about glass when she's ready. And again, Amr, when he's done with his doctorate, we plan on doing work in the Himalayas, and he may be setting up an ethnobotanical lab. And I will take his expert guidance in setting one up so that we can have good research on those lines in the Himalayas as well. So with that, Amr, we have this tradition of the speaker leaving us with some words of wisdom. So would you do
Yes,
that,
thank
please?
you. Sorry?
Words of wisdom before you leave.
Yeah. Plants, and especially flowers, are the signal of life. So wherever you find them, you know, there is life and hope. There's no plants, know that there is something wrong about us, that we have to bring them back to our life and get closer to them. Especially under quarantine, when we get a pandemic like this, it means we didn't behave well with our plants and flowers.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
And have a good day, Amr,
Thank
and a
you.
good night to all of you who joined us
Thank you.
and who
I
left
appreciate it.
because of
Thank
course.
you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye
Thanks,
bye.
Otis.
Bye
Bye-bye,
bye.
and see you all next Sunday. Bye.